The glorious burden was a brick with engines, a monument to pure utility. Its hull, scarred by countless scratches and old weld seams, reflected the dull gray of the asteroid it had just departed. Inside, the air smelled stale and metallic, thick with machine oil and the faint tang of sweat. Captain Bennet Ceres rubbed his tired eyes, watching the starfield slide past the main viewport. It was a milk run, the most boring kind. Their hold was packed with 12 modular reactor cores. Each one was a dense cylinder of fabricated metal, wrapped in crystalline circuitry that hummed with potential energy. They were destined for a new mining outpost on the fringe. Human forges pumped out thousands of these cores. They were utterly mundane. "Transition complete, Captain," said his pilot, Arlen. Her voice was flat with routine. 5 hours to the next waypoint, all systems nominal." Ceres just grunted. He was about to suggest another pot of terrible coffee when the space ahead of the ship rippled. It was not a natural phenomenon. Space did not shimmer like heat haze in a vacuum. A silent distortion, like a flaw in reality itself, bloomed into existence a kilometer off their bow. It pulsed once, a sickly violet light bleeding from its edges, and deposited something into normal space. The thing that emerged was a vessel, but not like any Ceres had seen. It looked less like a ship and more like a piece of a deep-sea reef, ripped from some alien ocean and set adrift among the stars. Its surface was a complex lattice of calcified, organic-looking structures, glowing with soft internal bioluminescence. Flowing tendrils, delicate as sea grass, drifted from its stern, twitching in unseen currents. It was beautiful, and it was terrifying. "Contact," Arlen's boredom vanished, replaced by sharp alarm. "Unidentified vessel, no transponder codes, no match in the registry." "Hail them," Ceres ordered, his own heart beginning a steady, heavy drum against his ribs. "Standard first contact protocols. Keep our weapons cold but power the point defenses." The communications officer, a young man named Finn, worked his console. "Hailing on all frequencies. No response to radio, laser, or standard data bursts." He listened, his face puzzled. "But they're broadcasting something. It's not a signal, it's more like a sound." He patched it through to the bridge speakers. A series of resonant pulses filled the air. They were deep, complex, and layered, like the song of a whale filtered through a crystal harp. There was a pattern to it, an undeniable intelligence, but it was utterly alien. The ship's translation software churned and failed, returning a blinking error, linguistic matrix incompatible. "They're not answering," Finn said, stating the obvious. The coral ship drifted closer. It made no aggressive moves. Its gentle, flowing appendages seemed almost curious. For a long, tense minute, the two ships hung in the silent dark, the only communication a haunting, untranslatable song. Then the coral vessel did something impossible. A section of its crystalline hull irised open. From within, a pod of shimmering, gelatinous energy coalesced and shot toward the glorious burden. It moved with a strange, languid grace, not at the speed of a projectile, but like a bubble drifting on a slow wind. Alarms blared as point defense lasers fired, but the beams passed through it as if it weren't there. "Brace for impact," Ceres shouted, but the impact never came. The energy pod struck the cargo bay hull and did not pierce it. Instead, the very space inside the bay twisted. On the internal monitors, Ceres watched a sphere of wrongness bloom amidships. This void pocket was a perfect sphere of absolute black, fringed with crawling violet light. It ignored bulkheads and deck plating, existing partially through them. The air around it warped with a sound like tearing silk. Inside that sphere, 3 of the reactor cores simply ceased to be. One moment they were solid, massy objects. The next they were gone, swallowed without a flash of energy or a fragment of debris. The void pocket persisted for 3 heartbeats, a hole punched in reality itself, then collapsed with a final, sickening pop. The alarms changed pitch, screaming about sudden mass loss and minor hull stress. The coral ship pulsed once, its bioluminescence flaring brighter. Then it drifted backward, the space around it shimmering again with that same violet distortion. It slid into the anomaly and vanished, leaving only the uncorrupted starfield behind. Silence reclaimed the bridge, broken only by the frantic beeping of consoles. "Report," Ceres said, his voice hoarse. "Cargo bay breached but not breached," Arlen said, struggling for words. "Sensors show a perfect spherical volume of Deck 3 is just gone, along with cargo manifests 3, 4, and 5. Hull integrity is stable around the affected area. It's like something took a bite out of the ship but sealed the edges." "A bite," Ceres repeated. He stared at the empty space where the beautiful, terrible ship had been. "They didn't board us," They didn't try to communicate. They just destroyed 3 reactor cores and left. Why, Finn whispered. What was the point? Ceres had no answer. He felt a cold dread settle in his gut, deeper than the fear of a pirate attack or a system's failure. This was a mystery that made no sense, a demonstration of power so advanced it seemed like magic, used for a purpose he could not fathom. Log everything, every sensor reading every millisecond of that pulse. Get me a tight beam channel to Sector Command. We're not delivering the rest of this cargo. We're going home. The incident report, tagged with the highest priority, traveled faster than the glorious burden. It landed in the analysis grid of Commander Elias Voss, a man whose career was built on understanding threats. He sat in a sterile office on a bustling orbital station, the data stream from the burden painting a bizarre picture across his screens. He watched the sensor replay of the Coral ship's appearance, the emission of the resonant pulses, the launch of the Void weapon. He focused on the moment of the Void pocket's formation. His technical analysts had already put a name to it, a dry label for an impossible thing, a localized dimensional phase shift. The weapon had not burned or exploded its target. Instead, it had temporarily moved that volume of space somewhere else, to a layer of reality where matter could not hold together. That layer was called a non-brain existence. It was a place beyond the normal universe, a space where solid objects dissolved into nothing. The technology behind this was staggering. Voss leaned back, steepling his fingers. His military mind wrestled with the puzzle. The attack was surgically precise, capable of bypassing any known shield or armor. It could have targeted the bridge, the engines, the life support. It could have swallowed the entire ship. Instead, it destroyed 3 factory-standard reactor cores in a cargo hold. It was a test, he murmured to his empty office, or a message or both. But the message was written in a language humanity did not speak. The Coral, as the analysts had started calling them, were an unknown. No records from the older galactic powers matched their profile. The Shadow Meld were a species that hid in folds of space, leaving no trace of their movements. The Echo-Ancients had vanished long ago, but their remnants had shaped the galaxy. Neither of these ancient races had ever encountered anything like the Coral. They were a new player, or a very old one emerging from the depths. Voss drafted his initial assessment. The conclusions were unsettling. Hostile intent was unclear, but hostile capability was off the scale. The weapon demonstrated a mastery of dimensional mechanics that human science considered theoretical. The fact that it was used for such a seemingly trivial act made it more frightening, not less. It spoke of a power so vast that destroying a human cargo ship was beneath notice, while destroying a specific part of its cargo was worth the effort. The first whispers began in the corridors of Sector Command. They called it the Void Gardener Incident after the burden's name. The whispers spoke of a new threat, one that did not fight for territory or resources, but for reasons utterly alien. They spoke of ships made of living rock and weapons that erased things from reality. They wondered what would happen if the Coral stopped targeting reactor cores and turned their void pockets on something else. A city, a planet, a sun. Captain Bennet Ceres, nursing a strong drink in his damaged ship, wondered the same thing. He kept seeing the serene, beautiful vessel and hearing its haunting song. He kept seeing the perfect sphere of nothing where his cargo had been. He had looked into the void, and the void had taken a precise, measured bite. He knew with a cold certainty that humanity was no longer alone in its quiet corner of the galaxy. Something had noticed them. And its first act was an incomprehensible, devastating whisper. The scout's return was a soft chime in the dark. It slipped back into the fleet's embrace, its coral hull brushing against the larger living structures with a whisper of stone on stone. The fleet was not a formation, but an ecosystem. It drifted as a loose constellation of habitats, each one a grown architecture of spiraling calcium and bioluminescent veins. Light here was a gentle, internal thing, a deep-sea glow that pulsed with the slow rhythm of communal thought. A senior scientist, a lithoshaper named Nav, felt the scout's arrival. This title designated a being that could shape living rock and understand the fundamental harmonies of spacetime. Nav's own form, a bipedal sculpture of porous white coral, stood before an observation node, a basin of viscous fluid that displayed gravitational tides. The information came through the resonance web. This network was not technological, but biological, connecting the entire fleet through a complex exchange of subsonic vibrations and chemical cues. Nav absorbed the scout's report through its root-like feet. The data packet was pure sensory experience, the blocky, angular vessel, the frantic, chaotic electromagnetic shouts, the distinct, festering signature of a dimensional instability buried in its cargo hold. A plume of frustrated pheromones, sharp as ozone, bloomed from Nav's upper facets. Its mood resonated through the chamber, causing the ambient glow in the wall polyps to dim toward a concerned amber. Another of its kind approached, a younger being named Call. It was a Scuda-shaper, a member of a caste built for swift movement and the maintenance of the fleet's outer hulls. Call's form was smoother, and it communicated with a low hum that vibrated through the deck. The anomaly was excised. Call's question carried the flavor of hope. It was, Nav responded, its own subsonics layering with bitter compounds. The procedure was technically clean. The scout fired a single void torpedo. The weapon did not explode. It induced a controlled collapse of the malignant pocket. The foreign vessel's structural integrity remains. Then the frustration is their ignorance. Nav shifted, a grating sound of patience worn thin. The scout's full spectral analysis is conclusive. The vessel was riddled with nascent void pockets. They clustered around its power cores like cysts. The one we collapsed was merely the most acute. Nav directed a manipulator tendril toward the fluid basin. The scene replayed, not as visual light, but as a topographical map of spatial stress. The human ship appeared as a crude, hard-edged silhouette. Within it, ugly vortices of violet and black pulsed around the reactor signatures. They were tears in reality, small but growing. To Nav's senses, they screamed of a profound sickness. They fold space to pack their energy, Nav said, its vibrations dripping with disdain. But their folds are leaky. Each leak creates a bubble of broken space. Those bubbles grow. Nav paused, letting the image sink in. If a bubble grows too large, it collapses. That collapse could tear apart the very fabric of a star system. Call recoiled, its bioluminescence flickering in alarm. A plague ship. Precisely. Nav's pheromones now carried the heavy, solemn weight of grim certainty. They are carriers. They do not fire weapons. They bleed infection. The gelatinous pod was not an attack. It was a medical probe designed to diagnose and then trigger a targeted collapse, a surgical excision. The aliens perceived it as a violation. They are oblivious to the disease they carry. The data resonated out from Nav's chamber, flowing through the resonance web into the fleet's shared consciousness. The Coralkin did not think as individuals, not truly. They were a consensus organism. Nav's analysis became a thread woven into the greater tapestry of their group mind. The emotional tone that emerged was not anger. It was a profound, tragic sorrow. It was the sorrow of a gardener finding a beloved blight in a pristine forest. The consensus formed with the slow, inevitable force of a tectonic shift. These aliens, this humanity, were not malicious. Their technology was simply pathological. It was a cancer on the fabric of reality itself, born not of evil, but of a reckless, juvenile ignorance. The scouts' intervention had been a mere triage. The source of the infection remained. It was in their core worlds, their shipyards, their very understanding of physics. Call finally voiced the consensus taking shape. They will continue to spread. Every jump their ships make stresses the local substrate. Every reactor they build is a potential seed for void collapse. They are a walking extinction event for any region they inhabit. Yes, Nav vibrated. The word was a funeral dirge. We must sterilize the source. There was no cruelty in the statement. It was a biological imperative, clean and cold. The Coralkin were ecosystem builders. They nurtured gas giants into garden rings. They stabilized stellar flares. They considered the integrity of spacetime itself to be the fundamental ecology. A contagion that threatened that integrity required eradication. It was the first law of their existence. The course of action was horrifyingly clear. They had to find the root of the infection. They had to go to the human core worlds and cleanse the technological paradigm that created it. This was not conquest. It was not war in any sense the humans would understand. It was a galactic quarantine procedure, a grim, necessary cleanup. Nav accessed the navigational memory. The scout had traced the human vessel's jump signature back to its point of origin. A star cluster, newly dotted with radioactive signatures from high-yield fission and crude warp wakes. A young, noisy, dirty civilization. Humans left a brilliant, screaming trail across every spectrum. They had no concept of stealth, no philosophy of harmony. They shouted their presence to the void, and in doing so, they were ripping it silently apart from within. Plot the course, Nav resonated to the fleet at large. The order was absorbed. The great coral habitats began a slow, graceful reorientation. Their tools were terrifying in their scope. They carried gene forges, devices capable of rewriting the biology of entire worlds. With these and the same void torpedoes from the scouts' encounter, they would perform their devastating operation. They would use these tools not to destroy humanity, but to save everything else from humanity's unwitting poison. Call watched the star map shift, the course line burning a solemn path toward the human worlds. Its vibrations were soft, mournful. They will fight. They saw the excision as an attack. They will see our arrival as an invasion. Nav was silent for a long moment, its chemical signature a complex stew of resignation and resolve. Then they will die fighting the cure for their own sickness, a tragic waste, but the substrate must be preserved, the garden must be weeded. The fleet moved. It slipped into the deeper currents between stars, a silent archipelago of living stone on a mission of mercy that would look, to its intended beneficiaries, exactly like genocide. The reports began as scattered whispers from the fringe, then swelled into a chorus of panic. Captain Bennet Ceres listened to the flood of distress calls on the bridge of the glorious burden, his knuckles white on the edge of the command console. His own encounter was no longer an isolated mystery. It was the first drop of rain before the deluge. Coralkin ships, those beautiful and terrible organic vessels, appeared without warning near human outposts. They flickered into existence near mining colonies on airless rocks, their bioluminescent hulls casting eerie shadows on refinery domes. They ghosted through the crowded shipping lanes of the Cygnus transfer point, causing a dozen collisions as freighters scrambled to evade. Their attacks followed no pattern a human tactician could decipher. They ignored military patrols. They bypassed population centers. Instead, they targeted freighters hauling raw materials, automated ore processors on asteroid belts, and the lonely power stations that fueled entire outposts. Always, they used the same weapon, those gelatinous pods that phased through armor to create perfect, hungry spheres of nothingness inside their targets. Commander Elias Voss, his face a mask of grim fatigue on the fleet command feed, addressed a gathering of civilian and military leaders. His voice was a low rasp. They are not conducting a war of conquest. This is systematic sabotage. They are targeting our industrial and logistical backbone. The method, however, is, he paused, searching for a word that wasn't madness. It is technologically opaque. On the burden, Bennett replayed the sensor logs from a dozen attacks. Pilot Arlen pointed a shaking finger at the screen. Look, the Midas Touch was carrying deuterium slugs. They took out its reactor but left the cargo bay full of fuel untouched. The outpost on Persephone's rock lost its forge, but the habitat dome wasn't even scratched. It's like they're performing surgery, Communications Officer Finn murmured. But for what disease? The breakthrough came not from military intelligence, but from a materials physicist on Luna. Dr. Yael Tannis, her voice crackling with exhausted excitement over a secure channel, presented her findings to Commander Voss and a skeptical advisory board. You're looking for a military target profile, she said. There isn't one. Their technology isn't targeting matter, it's targeting a specific kind of energy. She brought up spectral analyses of the void pocket events. These showed the energy signatures from human technology just before an attack. Every single target shared a precise profile. The torpedoes were tuned to the resonant frequency of standard human fusion cores. They also matched the output harmonics of high-yield industrial plasma forges. The aliens aren't seeing warships or factories, Yael pressed. They're seeing beacons, flares, something about the way we generate power looks like a threat to them. Commander Voss leaned forward, his eyes narrowed. You're saying they're shooting at our power sources because they don't like the way they glow. I'm saying they might mistake them for something else, Yael corrected, pushing a strand of gray hair from her forehead. Imagine you're a doctor and you see a rash, you treat the symptom. You don't ask the virus its political affiliation. Their technology reacts to these signatures as if they are pathological, a threat to be excised. The theory landed like a stone in still water. It explained the seemingly random surgical strikes. It framed the incomprehensible violence as a clinical procedure. But the revelation brought no relief, only a colder, deeper dread. How do you reason with a surgeon who believes your heart is a tumor? There was no time to find an answer. The Coralkin fleet made its next move. Hephaestus Prime was the crown jewel of human orbital industry. A sprawling constellation of docks, dry docks, and zero-G forge frames, it was where the skeletons of cruisers were spun from molten alloy and fitted with the hearts of stars. A full battle group, the 3rd Defensive Line, stood guard around it. Their commanders expected an assault on the new Vanguard-class battleships nearing completion. They prepared for a fleet engagement. They were wrong. The Coralkin did not engage the warships. A dozen of their vessels emerged from spatial distortions already inside the defensive perimeter, their arrival silent and instantaneous. They moved with a terrifying, graceful indifference to the human ships scrambling to intercept. Void torpedoes, in numbers never before seen, streaked out. They did not head for the battleships. They arced toward the great reactor complexes that powered the entire shipyard. They slid into the massive forge frames where hull plates were being annealed. One after another, perfect spheres of negation bloomed deep within the industrial heart of Hephaestus Prime. The silence that followed was more terrible than any explosion. The great forges went dark and cold in an instant. The reactor complexes did not explode. They were simply unmade. Cascading systems failures rippled outwards. Power grids failed. Life support on half the station flickered and died. A half-constructed cruiser, its spine severed by a void pocket that removed a 100-meter section of its frame, slowly began to twist and break apart under its own stress. The human warships fired everything they had. Plasma beams carved glowing scars into coral hulls. Kinetic rounds shattered delicate spires. The Coralkin ships weathered the storm, their organic armor regenerating with visible, rapid growth. They did not return fire against the fleet. Their work complete, they simply retreated, fading back into the shimmering distortions that had birthed them, leaving behind a crippled, darkening monument to human ambition. On the bridge of the glorious burden, the final transmission from Hephaestus Prime played out on screen. It was not from Commander Voss. It was from a junior engineer on a maintenance pod, her face lit by the emergency lights of her suit, the dying shipyard spinning in the viewport behind her. "They didn't even look at the warships," she said, her voice hollow with shock. "They just killed the machines, they killed the lights." The feed cut to static. Bennet Ceres stared at the silent screen. The fear that had been coiling in his gut since his own encounter now crystallized into a hard, cold understanding. Commander Voss's analysis had been correct, but incomplete. This was more than industrial sabotage. It was a message written in the void, carved into the corpse of their greatest shipyard. The Coralkin were not here for their territory. They were not here for their lives, not directly. They were here for their industry, for their power, for the very means of their expansion. The message was clear and it was absolute. Your growth is the infection. Your engines are the symptom. We are the cure. The silence after Hephaestus Prime was the worst part. Fleet command was a tomb of hushed voices and flickering tactical displays, every officer waiting for the next vital system to go dark. Commander Elias Voss stood on the bridge of the cruiser steadfast, his knuckles white on the railing. The enemy was a ghost, phasing through their best defenses to kill their industry with chilling, clinical precision. But ghosts, he reasoned, left a trail if you knew where to look. "Signal from the burden," his tactical officer called out. "Captain Ceres has a theory." Voss listened to Bennet's strained voice over the comm. It was a gamble based on Dr. Tannies' analysis. The Coralkin struck at power signatures, always the largest, always the most complex. They were drawn to energy like surgeons to a fever, so you didn't hunt the surgeon, you set a feverish trap. The bait was the glorious burden itself, its holds crammed with unstable, high-yield fusion cores rigged to mimic a catastrophic cascade. The vessel limped into a sparse asteroid belt, broadcasting a frantic, leaking energy signature across every band. The Predator took the bait. A harvester ship smaller than the fleet killers but just as organic, phased into reality 100 kilometers off the freighter's port bow. Its coral spines glowed with a soft, hungry light. As it moved to envelop the burden, the space around it erupted. 6 human cruisers, including the Steadfast, dropped their stealth fields and powered up every jamming array and gravity anchor they possessed. The effect was a violent electronic scream. The Coralkin vessel shuddered, its phase drive stuttering. For the first time, it was stuck in normal space. "Grapplers away," Voss ordered, his voice flat. "All boarding teams go." The harvester ship thrashed like a speared fish. It tried to bring its void torpedo pods to bear, but the human electronic warfare suites, a chaotic storm of scrambled frequencies, fouled its targeting. Massive magnetic grapplers shot from the Steadfast, biting deep into the living coral hull. Airlocks extended, sealing against the shivering flesh of the alien ship. Inside, Sergeant Anya Cater led her Marine squad into a nightmare of breathtaking beauty. Her boots sank into a spongy deck that pulsed with faint light. The walls were a labyrinth of spiraling, bioluminescent coral in hues of deep violet and electric blue. A warm, viscous fluid dripped from archways, pooling in iridescent sheets. The air in their sealed helmets was sterile, but their external sensors registered a thick, salty atmosphere. There was no corridor, no clear path. They moved through an ecosystem. No hostiles, Cater reported, her weapon sweeping across groves of crystalline fronds. No doors, no consoles, nothing that looks like engineering. They found life but not soldiers. Small, multi-limbed creatures like living starfish skittered away from their lights, merging into the walls. Glowing polyps contracted at their touch. The ship itself seemed to breathe around them, a slow, rhythmic expansion and contraction that made the floor shift unsettlingly. They were not being attacked. They were being ignored or studied. Deep in the heart of the vessel, they found the lithoshaper. The chamber was a vast, fluid-filled sphere. In its center, suspended in a nutrient current, floated Nav. Its coral body was larger, more complex than its attendants, covered in intricate mineralized patterns. Around it, three smaller Coralkin, skutashapers, drifted, their fronds weaving through the fluid in constant, silent communication. The human's arrival triggered a change. The gentle bioluminescence flared into a strobing, distressed pattern of crimson and white. The fluid churned. "They're panicking," one Marine whispered. "But not at us, look." The skutashapers were frantically directing smaller worker creatures towards sections of the wall where the human grapplers had penetrated. They were trying to seal the wounds, to stem the leaking fluid. Their pulses were the agitated rhythms of gardeners discovering a broken pane in a greenhouse, letting in a toxic frost. The translation was a nightmare of its own. The steadfast linguists, working with samples from the burden, had built a crude algorithm based on resonant frequency. They fed the alien light pulses into it, generating halting, synthetic speech. A speaker on Cater's suit crackled. The voice was toneless, genderless, and filled with static. "You are inside the living tissue. You cause structural decay. Desist." Commander Voss's voice came over the squad channel. "Ask it why they are attacking us." Cater triggered the two-way feed. "We mean no harm to your vessel. Why do you attack our worlds?" The lithoshaper Nav pulsed. A long moment later, the translation came. "Attack is imprecise. Excision is required. You broadcast terminal pathology. You scream with dimensional decay. Your technology is leaking. It creates voids, tumors in the flesh of space." On the bridge of the Steadfast, Voss exchanged a look with his science officer. "Dimensional decay? Ask it to clarify. What technology?" Cater repeated the question. The answer was a flood of pained light. "The signature is unmistakable. The shoddy folds, the screaming power sources. You use primitive dimensional folding for your energy, but you do not maintain the folds. They rupture, they bleed. Each of your large factories, each reactor is a festering point, a void pocket incubator. We excise the infection before it metastasizes. The tool is precise. It closes the wound." A cold understanding began to dawn in Voss's mind, colder than the vacuum outside his hull. "Tell it we have no dimensional folding technology. Our power is fusion, atomic, chemical, tell it." Cater sent the message. The lithoshaper's light pattern slowed, shifting from distress to a profound, confused sorrow. "This is not possible. The signature is clear. The void pockets are there. We have measured them. We have removed them. Your species spreads them like a plague." "Where?" Voss demanded, his voice tight. "Ask it where it found these voids." The translation process took longer this time. The Coralkin was sharing data. "The first was a small vessel, 3 unstable cores in its hold. We cleansed it. The largest was at the orbital nest you call Hephaestus Prime. The central reactors were dense with malignant potential. We closed them. We are gardeners. You are not enemies. You are a blight, an unaware carrier." The bridge of the Steadfast was utterly silent. Voss saw the same horrified realization on every face. The 3 reactor cores on the glorious burden, the forges of Hephaestus Prime. The Coralkin hadn't been targeting their military. They hadn't even been targeting them. They had been performing surgery on what they saw as leaking, dangerous technology. The void torpedoes weren't bombs. They were scalpels. The reverse reveal hit with the force of a physical blow. They were not at war with conquerors. They were being systematically dismantled by fanatical, cosmic surgeons who believed they were saving reality from a cancer. And the worst part, the part that turned Voss's blood to ice, was the dawning, awful possibility that the Coralkin might not be wrong. "Ask it," Voss said, his voice barely a whisper. "What happens if the infection is not excised?" Nav's light dimmed to a somber, steady blue. "The void pockets grow, they merge, they unravel local spacetime. Reality becomes necrotic. It has happened before. The Equancients left records, a whole spiral arm, silent and dead. We are the gardeners. We prune the disease. We are sorry for your pain. But the body of the cosmos must be kept whole." The transmission ended. In the alien chamber, Sergeant Cater stared at the beautiful, tragic creature floating in its tank. It looked at her not with hatred, but with the pity of a doctor for a terminal patient who refuses treatment. On the steadfast, Commander Voss sank into his chair. The war was over. In its place was something infinitely more terrible, a diagnosis. The silence on the bridge of the glorious burden was a physical weight. It pressed down on Captain Bennet Ceres, on Commander Elias Voss watching from the fleet holotank, and on Dr. Yale Tannis, who was just a voice on the comm from her Luna lab. The alien's words, translated through a grating mechanical filter, hung in the air. Excision, pathology, terminal. Voss broke the quiet, his voice a low rasp. Dr. Tannis, you heard. Does any of that make sense to you? From the speaker, they heard a sharp, indrawn breath, then the sound of frantic typing. It makes a terrible kind of sense, Yale said, her words tumbling out. They're not targeting our weapons. They're targeting our power signatures, our heaviest industry. They called it a leak, a dimensional leak. Our reactors are stable, Ceres insisted, a defensive edge in his tone. Every safety protocol, every containment field. Not the reactors themselves, Yale interrupted, her focus absolute. Think downstream, think about the load, the specific high-energy harmonic produced by a Hephaestus-grade plasma forge, the resonant frequency of a full planetary industrial grid running at midnight peak. She paused, and the clicking of her keyboard stopped. Commander, I need the full, unredacted technical schematics for the Mark IV gene forge, the ones buried under the Council's forbidden tech edicts, right now. Voss didn't hesitate. He entered a command, his fingers moving with grim certainty. You have them. More silence, broken only by the hum of the ship and the distant, watery sounds from the captured Coralkin vessel on their visual feed. The lithoshaper, Nav, waited with a stillness that felt like judgment. Then Yale Tannis whispered a curse. It was a small, hopeless sound. The Echo Ancients, she said. The name meant little to Ceres, a footnote from history. To Voss, it was the name of the enigmatic race that had gifted humanity its first functional FTL drive cores 80 years ago, then vanished into the galactic deep. The foundation of their expansion. What about them? Voss asked. Their technology wasn't just physics, it was biology, dimensional biology. Our early drives worked on principles we never fully understood, just maintained. Stable. Passive. Yale's voice tightened. The Gene Forge project, we used recovered Equancient code as a template, a shortcut to make terrestrial adaptation faster. We thought it was inert, a historical curiosity. She took a shuddering breath. It's not inert, it's a dormant program. The specific energy signature of our entire civilization acts as the trigger. The code doesn't activate in the Gene Forge itself. It activates in the people treated by them. It uses our own bodies as a catalyst to unpick the fabric of reality. That process creates the microscopic void pockets. They spread. They are the decay. The truth unfolded in the quiet, a poison flower. The Coralkin are right, Yale finished, her voice hollow. We are sick. Our technology is a pathogen. We're leaking dimensional decay just by existing at our current scale. They see it. They feel it. Like we'd see a radiation bloom or a plague cloud. On the visual feed, the lithoshaper's fronds stirred gently in its nutrient bath. It was waiting for them to understand their own death sentence. Voss felt the walls of reality close in. The military solution was a joke. You couldn't fight a diagnosis. The political solution was suicide. Revealing this to the wider galactic community would see humanity quarantined at best, sterilized at worst by a coalition of terrified species. The Coralkin were just the first surgeons to the operating table. He looked at the image of the captured Harvester, a beautiful living vessel designed to cut away cancer. He looked at the fleet readiness reports scrolling on his holotank, the thousands of ships, the billions of lives. A desperate, wild thought began to form. It was not a soldier's thought. It was a human thought. Open the channel to the Harvester, Voss said, his voice suddenly calm. Full translation sweet. Sir, Ceres asked. Do it. The link hissed to life. Voss stood, squaring his shoulders to the alien visage. Lithoshaper Nav, we understand your diagnosis. The translated voice was serene. Then you understand the necessity. The excision must be total. The source pathology must be extinguished. You're wrong about the treatment, Voss said, each word deliberate. The infection is not the patient. It is a faulty subroutine within the patient's technology, a dormant code. You propose to kill the patient to delete the code. There is no distinction. The code is active, the decay spreads. There is a distinction, Voss insisted, leaning forward. You fix a corrupted system by isolating and rewriting the bad code. You don't smash the entire terminal. The Coralkin was silent for a long moment. Your analogy is flawed. The system is vast, distributed across your entire species. The rewrite is impossible. The infection is too profound. A hard, grim smile touched Voss's lips. It was the smile of a man who had seen the bottom of the abyss and decided to build a ladder out of scrap. Impossible for you, Voss said. You work with living coral, you shape, you grow, you excise with precision. He paused, letting the words hang. We are not Coralkin, we are humanity. We don't fix things delicately. He turned to a secondary screen, pulling up schematics not of weapons but of infrastructure. Planetary fabricator arrays, automated medical bay templates, fleet-wide broadcast protocols. When we have a systemic flaw, Voss continued, his voice gaining strength, we rip the entire system out every single instance, and then we rebuild the same thing everywhere all at once. He tapped the screen. This faulty code is in our gene forges. It is in every person treated by them. That's the infection, so we rip it out. Every forge, every sequence, from every human who carries it. Nav's fronds trembled. The trauma would be catastrophic. Biological rejection, systemic collapse. Probably, Voss agreed, the words stark and honest. But we don't have to do it biologically. Not at first. We have mental shields. They are crude by your standards, but they block directed mental energy. He continued, we can build a jamming field. It would broadcast a pattern based on those shields to suppress the active echo-ancient code. Then we create a mental isolation zone, he added. That stops the leak. It proves the diagnosis is treatable. He could see the shift in the lithoshaper's posture, a minute tilting of its core body, from finality to curiosity. This is a temporary measure. The code remains. Then we rebuild, Voss said, spreading his hands. We turn every fabricator, every shipyard, every orbital platform to one task. Not ships, not weapons, medical nanites. Millions of doses, billions, programmed to seek out and rewrite that single strand of code in every cell of every treated human. We flood our own systems with the cure. We manufacture our own remission. The bridge was utterly still. Ceres stared at Voss, understanding dawning, awe, and terror mixed in his eyes. It was a plan of monstrous scale. It would require turning the entirety of human industry away from defense, away from production, and towards a single, internal medical purpose. It was surrender and counterattack in one breathtaking gambit. Your species would comply? The lithoshaper's question was not skeptical, but genuinely perplexed. Such a unified, self-sacrificial action. Voss laughed then, a short, sharp bark. They'll complain, they'll argue. There will be protests and panic and 1,000 bureaucratic nightmares, but when the choice is a painful fix or annihilation, he met the alien sensor cluster gaze. We'll choose the fix. We are terrible at accepting fate. We are exceptionally good at throwing manpower and machinery at a problem until it breaks. He took a final breath. You see a cancer to be cut out. We see a recall notice. And we have the factories to handle the recall, all of them. Help us design the suppressor, then stand back and watch us work. The silence from the Coralkin vessel was long and deep. In it, Voss heard the fate of his species being weighed not on a scale of weapons, but on a scale of will. Finally, the translated voice returned, softer, its melodic underpinnings strange and new. We will observe, provide the schematics of your dampener concept. We will analyze. It was not agreement, but it was not a void torpedo. Voss nodded, the weight on him not lifting, but shifting. The war was over. The real work, the impossible, brutal human work, was about to begin. The silence on the bridge of the glorious burden was not peaceful. It was the taut, humming quiet of a wire about to snap. Captain Bennet Ceres watched the main viewer, where the image of lithoshaper Nav floated within its chamber of living coral. The alien's fronds were still, its bioluminescence a steady, sorrowful blue. Commander Elias Voss stood beside the captain's chair, his knuckles white where they gripped the backrest. A cure, he said again, his voice low and rough. Not a cauterization. You have the map of the disease. We have the hands to apply the medicine. On the comm screen, Dr. Yale Tannies of Luna Command leaned forward, her face pale under the sterile light of her lab. The schematics Nav provided there for a resonance generator. It's a tuning fork for spacetime itself. It can stabilize the decay leaking from our reactors. Can we build it? Ceres asked. We already are, Yale said, a faint, wild spark in her eyes. The principles are alien, but the components are just matter. Superconductors, crystalline matrices, energy conduits. We don't understand the song it sings, but we can forge the instrument. We can forge 10,000 of them. Voss turned back to the viewer, to the ancient creature that saw his entire species as a sickness. "We need your guidance, the precise coordinates of every infection point, the correct frequency for each suture." Nav's fronds rippled. A complex series of chimes and pulses came through the translator. "Your method is violence. You shape reality with hammers. This artistry requires a scalpel's touch, applied over centuries." "We don't have centuries," Ceres said, his own frustration bleeding through. "You said it yourself. The decay is accelerating. Your way ends with us dead and the patient dying anyway, so let us try our way. Let us be the hammer." The lithoshaper was silent for a long moment. The light in its coral chamber dimmed, then brightened into a stark, brilliant white. "The data will be transferred, the symphony of stabilization. We will provide the score." The translator seemed to hesitate. "We will observe." Across 100 human systems, the great forges shuddered and changed their tune. The shipyards of Mars, of Titan, of the Centauri orbital rings fell silent as the half-built hulls of warships were towed into storage or broken down for raw material. In their place, new frameworks rose. They were not elegant. The void suture platform was a brutalist sculpture of girders and conduit, a boxy, utilitarian frame built around a single, intricate heart. At its core sat the resonance generator. It was a Coralkin design of interlocking crystalline lattices. Those lattices hummed with a soft, internal light. Human engineers called it the stapler. Human factories did not build one stapler. They built them in lots of 50. They built them on automated lines that ran 27 hours a day. They built them with standardized parts so that any crew could repair any platform with a wrench and a welding torch. The noise was immense, a cacophony of industrial fury that had not been heard since the first great push into the stars. Lithoshaper Nav, aboard its harvester ship observing the primary shipyard at Jupiter's orbital anchor, experienced the human effort as a physical assault. Through its ship's sensory fronds, it perceived not just sound, but intent. The crashing, the roaring, the endless showers of sparks were a torrent of chaotic will. Where Coralkin bioshaping was a quiet, patient conversation with materials, this was a shouting match that materials always lost. Nav felt a deep, instinctive horror at the violence of the process. Yet it could not look away. The speed was hypnotic. Where a Coralkin artisan shaper would have spent a human year growing and tuning a single generator, the human assembly line spat out a finished, tested platform every 6 hours. The volume was incomprehensible. "They are not gardeners," Nav pulsed to its younger attendant Scudashaper call. "They are terraformers of the abstract. They do not mend the tapestry. They bombard it with threads until the whole is gone." Call's own bioluminescence flickered with anxious orange. "The resonance is crude. It will hold. But the psychic backlash from such crude frequencies, it will shred an unprotected mind." Humanity had an answer for that, too. It was not a graceful one. The psionic ward was a bulky helmet assembly based on scavenged Solari technology. It fit over a standard environmental suit helmet like a clumsy second skull. Inside, it emitted a constant, low-grade neural static. That static felt like a persistent headache and the taste of tin foil. It blocked the disorienting, mind-bending effects of the void decay and the stapler's own emissions. It also made everyone irritable and slightly nauseated. The crews called them idiot hats and wore them without complaint. Deployment was not a surgical operation. It was a delivery. Fleets of rugged, hastily modified tugs hauled platforms by the dozen to the coordinates from the Coralkin. These loci of dimensional strain were invisible to human eyes. They were places in deep space where reality itself was growing thin and sick from the equancient pathogen. The crews would maneuver a platform into position, activate the generator, and retreat. The platform would anchor itself with crude gravitational clamps, and the stapler would come to life. From a distance, it was a silent, beautiful light show. The generator's core would flare, sending intricate geometric patterns of light weaving through the girder frame. A low thrum, felt in the bones more than heard, would propagate through space. The tear would stitch closed, a process visible as a faint shimmer that suddenly smoothed into the black of normal vacuum. Up close, it was terrifying. Space would crackle with unnatural energies. The light would sear the eyes even through filters. The psionic wards would buzz and heat up, fighting back psychic echoes that sounded like forgotten screams. Many crews came back quiet, needing hours of silence before they could speak of what they'd felt. The galaxy watched, utterly confused. The shadow meld who danced in the voids between reported frantic, undignified activity. The Ironfield legates who had expected humanity to be crushed observed the bizarre alliance with wary suspicion. The rootmind received the data, processed it through fungal networks, and offered no conclusion. A war had turned into a frantic, large-scale public works project. It made no strategic sense. On the bridge of the glorious Burden, now serving as a mobile coordination hub, Commander Voss allowed himself a single, tight smile. He looked at the strategic display. Hundreds of green icons winked across human space, each a deployed void suture platform holding the line against the decay. "We're doing it," he said to Ceres. "We're actually containing it." Captain Ceres nodded, but his eyes were on the feed from Jupiter. The Coralkin harvester ship hung there, a silent, organic sentinel. "They're not celebrating, look at them. They're just watching, like they're waiting for the other boot to drop." Lithoshaper Nav was indeed waiting. The human brute force approach was working beyond any Coral expectation. The sheer number of sutures was applying a stabilizing pressure across a vast swath of infected spacetime. But Nav understood the pathogen on a level the humans still did not. It was not a passive rot. It was a reaction, a response. The massive, simultaneous application of the resonance was not just healing the wounds. It was sending a shockwave through the subtle layers of reality. It was ringing a bell. And something was now listening for the source of the sound. The alert came from the furthest suture platform deployed near the dim red star of Barnard's Loop. The platform's sensors, designed to monitor dimensional stability, spiked wildly. Then they went dead. The tug crew, waiting at a safe distance, reported a visual. Space itself puckered, then tore. It was not a decay of a wound. It was a violent, intentional rip. From the tier emerged something that was not a ship. It was a jagged, geometric shape, all hard angles and non-reflective black. It made no light. It seemed to absorb the very starlight around it. It ignored the human tug. It moved directly to the still-thrumming void suture platform. A lance of null energy flashed. The platform, its girders, and its precious stapler core simply ceased to exist, not destroyed, erased. Then the black shape turned. It pinpointed the next nearest suture platform, 12 light minutes away. It moved toward it, not with a drive flare, but by seeming to flicker through space, leaving afterimages of nothingness behind. On the glorious Burden, the tactical screen lit up with a cascade of identical failure reports. Platform after platform went silent, in a precise, spreading pattern. Something was systematically hunting the sutures. A new data packet arrived from the Coralkin harvester. It was not a schematic. It was a warning, tagged with a priority glyph so old Nav had never used it before. The translator software rendered it in stark, plain text. Voss read it aloud, his voice hollow. "The cure has triggered an immune response. The pathogen is not inert. It is a marker, a beacon." He looked up, meeting Ceres's horrified gaze. "We haven't been fighting a disease. We've been wearing the uniform of an ancient enemy, and we just called for help." On the viewer, the beautiful, terrible coral ship pulsed with a new light. Nav's voice came through, quiet and final. "The immune response has begun. Your species must now prove it can survive the cure." The black shapes continued their hunt, and humanity's desperate gamble became a war on two fronts. The silence that followed the mobilization was not peaceful. It was the dense, charged quiet of 1 trillion tons of machinery holding its breath. Across the scorched and sutured lanes of human space, the stapler platforms hung in their crude constellations. Their resonance generators hummed a discordant, stabilizing song, a vibration felt not in the air but in the bones of spacetime itself. On the bridge of the glorious Burden, now serving as the nerve center for the operation, Commander Elias Voss watched the tactical overlay. The bleeding had stopped. The void pockets were sealed. A grim, exhausted satisfaction settled over the crew. Captain Bennet Ceres leaned against his command chair, the lines on his face etched deeper by weeks of relentless pressure. "Readings are holding, Elias. The decay signatures are gone, actually gone." Dr. Yale Tannies' voice, piped in from Luna Command, held a note of cautious triumph. "The resonance frequency is acting as a neutralizing harmonic. It's not just a bandage. It's forcing the faulty echo-ancient code into a dormant state. The patient is in remission." Voss nodded, his eyes never leaving the main screen. "Remission isn't a cure. The lithoshaper made that clear. This is a permanent treatment, not a fix." "Given the alternative," Ceres said quietly, "I'll take it." Then the screens flickered. It was not a systems failure. It was a wrongness in the light. The starfield outside the viewport seemed to dim, not from shadow, but from a sudden, profound lack of substance. Space itself looked thin, worn. A new alarm sounded, low and throbbing, a sound the glorious burdened systems had never been programmed to make. It was a frequency pulled from the Coralkin data stream, a warning for a phenomenon they had hoped never to name. On the dedicated comm channel to the captured harvester ship, the lithoshaper Nav's translated voice emerged. It was stripped of all its prior resonance, flattened into a raw digital scream of terror. "The beacon, you have lit a beacon, the devourer comes." The word meant nothing to Voss. The tone meant everything. It was the sound of absolute species-deep dread. "What is it?" Voss demanded, his voice cutting through the rising panic on his own bridge. Nav's reply was a cascade of horrific imagery. "The ultimate pathology, a void-born entity. It does not create decay. It consumes healthy reality. It feeds on stable spacetime, your resonance, your healing. It is a clarion call to a starving beast." The tactical overlay dissolved into chaos. At the ragged edge of the stabilized zone, where the last void pockets had been sealed, space began to unravel. It was not a tear, but a dissolution. A patch of cosmos the size of a star system simply faded. Stars within it winked out not with explosions, but with silent, pathetic dimming. Nebulae dissolved into gray mist. It was space being erased from the canvas of existence. And it was moving toward them. Coralkin fleet, a graceful constellation of living light, moved to intercept. They fired their void torpedoes, the same weapons that had so precisely excised Hephaestus Prime. The projectiles flew into the advancing fade and vanished without effect, consumed before they could even detonate. They launched bioplasmic charges that flared with tremendous energy, energy that was then siphoned away, making the Devourers advance momentarily brighter, hungrier. Their elegant, precise technology was worse than useless. "It was fuel." Nav's voice was a broken whisper in their ears. "We have no art for this. Our tools are for surgery. This is a wildfire." On the screen, Voss watched a Coralkin mothership, a vast and beautiful structure of spiraling coral, drift too close to the fading edge. It did not explode. Its bioluminescence simply drained away, color leaching into gray. Then its structure began to blur, its edges becoming indistinct as if it were a painting left in the rain. In seconds, it was a ghost. Then it was nothing. The bridge was utterly silent. Arlen, the pilot, had stopped breathing. Finn's hands were frozen over his comm panel. Ceres looked at Voss, and in his captain's eyes, Voss saw the same calculation he was now performing in his own soul. They had fought a war they misunderstood. They had found a desperate treatment. And now their very act of salvation had summoned the end of everything. The Devourer advanced, a wall of silent annihilation. The elegant Coralkin fleet was being brushed aside, their artistry meaningless. The human fleets, rallied and ready for a final battle, held their fire. There was nothing to shoot. Voss's mind, trained for logistics and attrition, raced over the same brutal numbers. They had one asset, one colossal, ugly, industrial-scale asset. "The platforms," he said, his voice hollow in the quiet. Ceres turned. "The staplers, they're for stabilization, they can't fight that." "Not to fight," Voss said, his gaze locking onto the tactical map. The map showed the thousands of stapler platforms, each a monument to human mass production, still humming their stabilizing frequency. They were capacitors, holding a tremendous charge of tuned dimensional energy. To trap. He opened a fleet-wide channel. His voice did not boom. It was calm, final, and heavy with the weight of the choice. "All stations, this is Commander Voss. Operation Gritstone is now in effect. Execute final sequence. Overload and sync all void suture platforms. Target convergence is the leading edge of the spatial dissolution. Drain them, all of them." A pause hung across human space. Then, from Luna Command, Yeltanis responded, her voice thick with understanding. "Commander, that will burn out every generator. The feedback will cascade through the network. It will fry the equancient substrate inside every gene forge. All reactors built on that same alien principle will fail. It will set our technology back 50 years. Voss watched the Devourer consume another light year of reality. "If we don't, there won't be a years to go back to. Do it." The order was given. Across 100 systems in the orbits of barren moons and above scarred planets, the stapler platforms received their final command. They were not designed for this. They were designed to heal. But humanity had a long, bloody history of repurposing tools into weapons. The hum of the generators changed. The stabilizing harmony twisted, warping into a single, focused, screaming note of pure resonant force. On the bridge, the crew clutched their heads as the sound vibrated through the ship's very atoms. Then they fired. Not a beam, not a projectile. It was a synchronized pulse of dimensional energy, a wavefront of forced stability so intense it became a physical law. It ripped from thousands of points, converging on the advancing fade. Where it met the devourer, reality screamed. The silent dissolution met a wall of absolute, rigid definition. The gray fade recoiled, not from damage, but from contradiction. The devourer fed on the pliable fabric of space. Humanity was not offering food. It was offering a cage of immovable, industrial-strength structure. The pulse did not push the entity back, it stitched it in place. Voss watched, his knuckles white on the command rail as the leading edge of the fade solidified. The gray nothingness crystallized, capturing the devourer's ravenous hunger mid-feast. The effect spread inward, a rapid crystallization of nullity. It was like watching a wildfire freeze solid. The void-born entity, a thing of consumption, was being trapped by the very act of its consumption. Humanity had weaponized the suture. They were not healing the wound. They were sewing the disease itself into the flesh of the galaxy, encasing it in a permanent, unbreakable scar of solidified reality. The stapler platforms paid the price. One by one, their overtaxed generators exploded in silent, flowering bursts of light. Others simply went dark, their innards fused into useless slag. The feedback pulse raced through the human network, a wave of nullifying energy. On Luna, in the orbital forges, in the hearts of 1,000 ships, the ancient, borrowed code within the gene forges flashed and died. The subtle biological efficiency that had propelled human technology for a century evaporated, leaving behind crude but functional machinery. The lights did not go out across human space, but they dimmed. The age of easy, borrowed miracles was over. On the view screen, the devourer was gone. In its place hung a vast, dark, and strangely geometric scar in the starfield. It was not a black hole. It was a patch of space that looked hard and final like a knot in cosmic wood. A prison built from the sacrifice of an entire civilization's technological future. The bridge of the glorious burden was filled with the sounds of ragged breathing and soft, disbelieving cries. They had won. They felt only a hollow, aching loss. The comm channel to the harvester ship hissed to life. The lithoshaper nav did not speak for a long time. When it did, the translated voice was not melodic. It was slow, filled with a reverence that bordered on awe and a sorrow that mirrored their own. Commander Voss, Captain Ceres, a pause as vast as the scar they had just created. You have done what we could not, you have saved the garden. Voss found his voice rough with exhaustion. We didn't know what else to do. That is the revelation, Nav resonated. We sought to excise the irregular, the chaotic, the inelegant. We saw your industry as a blight. We were wrong. You did not heal with grace. You healed with force. We misunderstood. Another silence, this one softer. Your chaos is not decay. It is a new kind of stability. The channel closed. The words hung in the air. The crew processed them slowly. There was no cheering, no celebration. On the screen, the last of the stapler platforms winked out, becoming inert, cold monuments orbiting dead space. They were tombstones for a future that might have been, and foundations for one that now had to be built anew. Commander Voss finally let go of the command rail. He looked at Captain Ceres, at Arlen and Finn, seeing the same hollow victory in their eyes. They had not won a war. They had performed a desperate, brutal surgery on reality itself, and had paid the surgeon's fee with their own progress. Set a course for the nearest stable port, Captain, Voss said, his voice barely above a whisper. We have a long way to go, and we're going to have to build the engines to get there ourselves. The glorious burden, a simple, utilitarian freighter once more, turned its back on the beautiful, terrifying scar and the graceful, watching coral fleet. It moved slowly, on newly clumsy and fundamental drives, toward home. Behind it, the galaxy was saved. Ahead, humanity's path was darker, harder, and utterly their own. They had not been granted a place in the garden. They had proven they were the gardeners, the ones who would mend the walls with brute force and relentless grit, season after season, until the job was done.